I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by Viet and Jeremy Raider-Hoàng, the editors-in-chief, writers, content, and creative direction on No One, which of course we sent out the month before last. So fellas, you're doing this whole thing yourselves, right? You're making this magazine happen.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of work and love and sweat and tears that we pour into it. Of course, there's many other hands and people who contribute and are helping, but there's quite a lot that the two of us are doing for each issue as well.
Yeah. So, well, I want to talk later about the other people working on the magazine because there's a big change
Yeah.
in issues 1 to 2. But maybe we should start with like sort of the beginning. So tell us, where did this magazine come from?
Yeah. So there's a couple different places where it sort of started. If we try and trace it back, there's three main ones that stand out to us.
Yeah.
So the first one is for the two of us, we're speaking to you now from Amsterdam. This is a place we've called home for almost 10 years now. And it took a couple years for us to sort of find our community, our space, a place where we started to feel comfortable here. And the two of us had been to a lot of different parties before, all different types of parties, maybe some that were labeled or called like a gay party, but both of us didn't necessarily feel completely comfortable at them. And it wasn't until we went to a party here called Supernature. It's by a collective called Supernature, where for the first time it felt like there wasn't like one box to fit in. There were actually so many different identities, colors, body types, body shapes present on the dance floor. And it left both of us thinking like, what is this place? What is this community and how can we find more of it?
Yeah, and then I think from that point on, we also realized that there's something special within nightlife, but also in particular within queer nightlife that allows the both of us and the people that we met on the dance floor to feel free to be who we are, but also in that freedom, finding others as well. And then that sort of led us to the second sort of event or moment that really also became foundational to the creation of No One magazine, which was when we visited not Amsterdam, Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City. I believe it was in 2021, and we attended one of the first Vietnamese ballroom event, which was a very sort of like magical moment for me because I was identify as a gay man, as a queer person. I didn't come out until 2018, 2017, so very late. And then I had to, in order for me to feel comfortable coming out, I had to move away from my country, really find myself before I can do that. So to find myself back in my hometown, to be surrounded by other queer kids, finding themselves and expressing themselves, and just expressing and dancing on the dance floor in a setting that was also taking inspiration from, the ballroom culture of Harlem. So there were just too many things that happening at the same time. But those kids on the dance floor, they were basically pioneering Vietnamese queer culture. And then from that point on, I also, both of us realized that, oh, wow, there's so much queer wisdom that's taking place well beyond the West, that under the surface and in places that, we wanted to bring to other people outside of, the Eurocentric area.
Mm-hmm. And for me, an interesting observation there was I'm originally from outside of Philadelphia, and ballroom culture itself is coming from New York, and Philadelphia is one of a couple cities where it was really taking off for over 30 years now. And to travel somewhere so far and so different, to go to somewhere like Vietnam and see how that culture takes root there in very similar but different ways was really amazing to see. And there were already many stories and sites that we were so excited to share with people when we came back. So
Yeah.
the third and the last point was a couple years back, the two of us lived in North Macedonia for a period of about a month. And one weekend we traveled up to go to Kosovo and we went to Pristina. So we visited some friends, we're staying with them there, and they happen to be human rights activists. And they were showing us this mural that they had enacted in the center of the city. And it depicted the first openly trans person in Kosovo. And they're embracing an openly gay man with disability. And it was a really moving piece. They shared the story about it, the history about it, and then they also shared that every day, every week since it had got put up, it was getting defaced constantly. And yeah, that stuck with us. And later that evening, we were out at a party and we happened to run into one of the people in the very mural. And it was this realization for the both of us that queer history, it's not something that only lives in textbooks. Of course, it's happening and continues to happen all around the world every day.
Yeah, and with those 3 moments, we felt like maybe there is something meaningful in creating a magazine, a physical magazine, so it could take up physical space to actively archive queer history in the context of nightlife, where we often feel safe and find one another. And that's basically the creation of No One magazine. And the name No One, yeah, comes from the idea of we're no one without each other, but at the same time, none of us is like another.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like just in that you've given this sense of, I guess, what attracts me to the magazine, which is there's this kind of like lovely sense of fun and playfulness and kind of insistence on joy in the magazine, but you're also always kind of hanging on to like, these like sort of deeper motivations of like reasons to do stuff. And we'll talk about that more later. I was interested in like how things were different for you between the first and second issues because so the first issue you made in Amsterdam, the city where like you've lived for like a decade. How well did you know the people and the kind of groups that were featured in the magazine?
Would you say 50-50? So 50% we know relatively well, and the other 50 we start from the ground up. Yeah.
Right, right. But so I mean clearly like the particularly the way that issue is made with like lots of Q&As, people who you choose are going to have a really strong influence on what the magazine becomes because it's kind of them in their words.
Yeah.
So it feels like that first issue, like Amsterdam as a city and its people, like really kind of made that magazine. Was
Mhm.
there then any anxiety for you in going like, okay, so we've done this in a place that we know really well, with like some of the people in it we know really well.
Yeah.
It's a very different matter to then fly across the other side of the world and do it somewhere else, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can take this question. I think it's definitely a challenge thinking about going to Vietnam and basically having to understand what our table or content can look like, because we can't just like attend all of these parties, even though of course we have connections. And actually one of our unspoken rules has been that we would not want to cover a city if we didn't at least try to visit it once and try to like experience, a sliver of what queer nightlife is there. But having said that, to your point, yeah, it's a different place. It doesn't have the same proximities that we did. And on top of that, when we approached the second issue, we knew that if we're going to do an issue about Vietnam, or honestly any city, country for that matter, we needed these stories to be written from the inside out. Vietnam as a country, and has been, when being written about in the past, has typically being seen in this sort of like Vietnam War, in this sort of victimizations, exoticizations, and all of that. It's quite pitiful, and we wanted to make sure that we don't do that again, or at least we don't want to keep writing about Vietnam from the outside in, which means that we needed to engage the people who lives there, who have tie, and who are truly on the day-to-day sustaining that space, which brings another level of anxiety, because now we're basically giving all of the control towards these contributors to pick their story, to reach out to these people, to develop their interview questionnaires, which we don't get to see all of these things, it is empowering to the people there, but it also means taking a lot of this sense of control that we were used to in the first issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But then also I think, I mean, it feels to me anyway like a massive step forward. So we'd spoken after the first issue, and one of the things that you said is that you wanted to do more than have Q&As in the second issue. So then like that opens up this whole vista of like possibilities. Like, how did you go about deciding like the pace of the magazine and like what type of stories you'd commission and get people to go and write for you?
Hmm. It took a lot of work,
Yeah.
definitely. I think to your point before, what was different, especially about this issue, is we had to put a lot more, even more thought and consideration into what the table of contents would be, since maybe we were a little more hands-off than we were in the first issue of actually writing as much ourselves. We wanted a clear idea of what stories we wanted to tell, but in terms of how we would tell them, that part we were happy to leave open. And it was quite exciting to get responses from potential contributors about like angles that they saw that we didn't necessarily think about, or a different angle of a story we wanted to tell. So it sort of took off in its own way that way.
Yeah, I think if I want to add, I might add to add that as well, is this is something that we didn't know that we were doing, but then we got this feedback from our friends and our readers who have read both of the issues, and they told us that like there is a certain lyricality and melody to the way we approach our magazine. And after them having read the first issue, they was like, oh, there's something strange about this magazine in terms of its pace and its sort of expression and its language. And then when they read the second issue, they basically sent us a message and say, now I think I understand your style and your visions and how you approach content, because this entire magazine feels almost like a DJ set or like a symphony. There's a higher pace, there's a lower pace, there's a moment where it's more euphoric and more imaginative. There's a moment where it's more grounding, and there's sometimes it feels sobering, sometimes feel a bit hazy. And I don't think we did it intentionally as much as how we like to, we just kind of like edited the way that we want to read it, and it works out that way. So that was also quite insightful for us to get that feedback from others, and we got that 2 times, same feedback.
Well, and also I think, you know, so for me as a complete outsider, so you know, I don't really know like queer clubbing culture. I don't really know Vietnamese culture. It feels to me like these stories are being written by people who are like properly embedded within those scenes or within those cultures. So then, you know, I mean, I remember like when I was editing magazines and you'd like commission a story and the writer comes back with something that's not quite what you wanted, but actually it's
Yeah.
better because they're like, nah, I don't think you mean that. I think you. So that like, what were some of the little kind of surprises that you got from that process?
Wow, a lot. I mean, the first one that comes to my mind was we had one writer who ended up writing 2 stories because we first got in touch with them because we knew that they were a drag performer and interested in drag. So we were like, this is great. We have someone really passionate about it who's up for writing. And the more we started talking with him, he also mentioned, oh, I also know some really big people in Loto, which is the first story that opens the second issue. And he ended up basically weaving together these different perspectives in the Loto scene that are, yeah, maybe figures that might be sort of difficult to involve in a project like this. They're really busy. They have many things going on in their lives. So finding the right type of contributor, I think, also opens doors. It changes your story angle, but it also, yeah, really opens the doors to new perspective and voices that we wouldn't have featured otherwise.
Yeah, and I think on that though, I think I do want to highlight 2 things. One is the language barrier is a real thing for sure. Like some of these writers, they aren't as proficient in English yet, and the way of writing is different, etc. But that is not to say that their story isn't strong and powerful. So I think there is such a strong collaboration between us and the writers to make sure that we can help them put the right words to their feeling. And I think this is helpful because I'm also Vietnamese, so I can also speak Vietnamese, and that has been helpful. I'm not sure how we're gonna do this in the new destinations. At least we have a heads up, but I think there's definitely like that challenge. Like we know that some story can only be told truthfully and authentically by a certain people. And those people might not be, you know, journalists or great writers, but those people are the people who understand the nuance of it. So then that become a bit of a collaborative process. And the other thing I want to share, this is a bit of it's adjacently related. It's about, so one of the story was a photo story. And then initially it was, we kind of concepted it together with this photographer to be about how queer people hang out at night in different places. And then we concepted to become this two queer couples going to hang out and, you know, be out and about in Vietnam at night. But then literally on the day before the photo shoot, both couples just broke up. So then both couple broke up, and then they
No
were,
one cares.
yeah, so then be like, okay, so the photo shoot is canceled. But then the photographer basically came up with the other idea. It was then become a photo shoot of a gay man and a lesbian woman hang out with one another and just driving each other around the city. And it's basically talking about how, you know, you can find each other in this sense of sadness as well, and then they can heal together. And it's become this like sense of platonic, but also romantic depictions of Vietnamese queer at night in a different way. So, you know, sometimes life kind of gives you curveballs, but then it creates something beautiful out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and look, also, you have to respond to the situation around you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
particularly when you're working at that sort of distance, this is something that magazine makers speak about in, kind of, you set up a photo shoot and a thing happens that means you can't do what you planned, and you end up with something that's like really cool in a different way. How long were you actually out there for?
In Vietnam. Not really. We weren't there at all.
Oh, really? Oh, right.
No.
Okay.
So because we travel, basically we go back to Vietnam every April. So we basically, when the April of last year, of this year, we went there to basically, well, the April of the previous year, we were in Vietnam, start talking, start getting booking conversation with people and say like, hey, we really want to do this magazine together with you. So then basically planting the seed. And then after we have planted the seeds, coming back to Amsterdam, beginning the project in around September last year, everything was remote, completely remote up until the point of launching in April this year. So
Wow. Okay. All right. So the everything at arm's length. So tell me about the launch in April, because was it three separate launches you had for this one?
four separate launches.
Four. Sorry, four.
Well, it was, when I'm telling people or friends, I say it's like a really positive whirlwind of couple weeks that it was, because we went from having the first issue with one launch at a place that we had visited and physically been,
Yeah.
to then organizing four launches in three new cities with three new audiences that we hadn't been there with the magazine before.
Yeah. But
So, yeah.
yeah, but then so then just for the context, right? Like the four CDs were we first launched in Hanoi at a queer club night at Savage, and the queer club night is called Snuck, in collaborations with a drag performance collectives called Peach. And then a week later, we launched in Ho Chi Minh City at a ballroom event. And then 2 weeks later, we launched at Club Raum in Amsterdam. And a week after that, we launched at a rave-oriented queer bookstore in Bushwick, New York City, that is called Hive Mind.
So altogether, it was, like I said, a whirlwind. There was a lot happening. And for three of the four of them, the first three, we organized performers. We also tried to make parts of the stories come to life. So in the Hanoi launch event, we had a Loto performance, and it was also part of an evening of Snug and Peach, which is the last story in the magazine. So you actually got a feel for what that is. The second launch in Ho Chi Minh City, it was at a ballroom event, of course. So there were a lot of people actually featured in the pages who were there walking in different categories that night. And we also had a couple drag performers, even a surprise one all the way from the Philippines. And in Amsterdam, we
Let's not
had,
forget a very special performance, Tạ Mong Manh,
of
which is
course, yeah.
basically a trans woman performing a traditional Vietnamese dance where she balances basically a massive drum on her head, and then on top of the drum is another man sitting on it with her head.
The same woman.
The same woman who also balancing an entire motorbike on her head in the middle of a party. So it's quite an iconic scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then in Amsterdam, we had a whacking performer come from Paris. And then in New York, that was the first time that we organized an event that was not at a club. It was at a bookstore.
Yeah.
And it brought a very different type of energy. So rather than having a performance or some type of crazy, surprising act, we actually just did a very low-key question and answer. And it was really something different and nice to see that we had a lot of strangers from New York coming and asking and being really interested in the magazine and what's happening halfway around the world.
Yeah, and along the process, we've also created a mini documentary with the people who contributed to the magazine. And the documentary is about Vietnamese queer nightlife. It's called How's Your Night? And then we screened that at the Amsterdam launch and the New York launch. And a highlight for me was able to reading my letter from the editor in Vietnamese to my mom at the second launch, which was crazy.
Yeah, I think one other highlight just to share is that the first issue, my parents flew in from the US so they could join, which was really special. And for this issue, we got to start with Viet's family in Vietnam. And actually, we ended with my family. My parents were able to come up in New York and see. So it's quite special that we both have families who are supportive, that also can be part of the journey of the magazine and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah. I mean, like just hearing you describing all of this, it strikes me how ambitious this whole thing is. So like, let's make a magazine in a city like on the other side of the world when like, we're not there. Then let's have like 4 launch parties and do all these. Like, how did the experience of doing all of that stuff compare to what you were kind of expecting or maybe hoping for?
It was a lot, to be honest. It was a lot more than we expected. It's a lot more than we've ever expected it to be because we also have a full-time job. So this is basically just another full-time job that obviously doesn't pay at all, as all magazine makers know. But it was a lot. It was exhausting at times, but for some reason, it's also very emotionally rewarding. I think there's a lot that's going on with the world last year and this year right now. But I remember one night specifically, Jen and I, we were just talking, and we talked about, and we said, we're so glad that we're working on No One right now, because without it, we would feel so lost because we didn't feel any sense of purpose at the time. And we just feel like there wasn't anything that we're doing that contributing to the world in a way that we find it meaningful. So yeah, this project is that for us.
And I think each time we work on it is more of a realization of our own identity and what it continues to shape into, and a better understanding of those around us.
Yeah, totally. Listen, everybody, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please just stick it in the chat. Or you can turn your camera on and I'll know that you want to ask something. Please have it in mind that we've got half an hour of their time, so it'd be great to get your questions as well. I'd like to get into some of the specifics of the magazine. Oh, hang on. So Dominic must have had his question pre-typed. That's like super quick. Okay, so Dominic, do you want do you want to ask this question, or would you like me to ask it for you?
Sure, I can ask it. So this is like the first magazine who had like a very interactive part in it. And I just wanted to mention that besides the magazine is very well designed, I found the stories really interesting. Since my girlfriend is also from Cambodia and she has also friends in Cambodia who are queer. So this was very interesting to get an insight into all that. But it was like really very cool to have like the stickers for after reading the chapter to just put it on the cover and make your own, because like these journeys that people in the stories have, it's like a very individual journey everybody has. So I were able to make the book also very individual to my journey while reading it. So I really like that. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Dominic. I got goosebumps. No, thank you.
That's really like, I don't know if we could want anything more from that. That's like such a beautiful way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we concepted this, interactive aspect of it, it was honestly the conceptual thinking was that then everybody can, make a stamp and kind of have their own versions of the issue, because of the same concept of, we're no one without each other, but none of us is like another. In the first issue, actually, we each hand apply all of these stickers on them in the cover. But then for the second issue, we just realized that we can't do that anymore. So we said, oh, why don't we just put a sticker page on it so it allows the readers to do it themselves. And I just really love hearing that your approach to it was that you read a story and then you apply that sticker, and then it sort of like trace your own timeline and your interaction with it is so cool. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, that's really lovely. Okay, so obviously like more questions for the people, please just keep throwing them in there. So talking about some specifics. So I think that Jeremy, I think it was you who mentioned earlier, or you've mentioned Lotto a couple of times, and that was one of the stories that really stuck out for me. And of course, it's like the first sort of like really like long written through story in a magazine, so that kind of shows there's a hierarchy here, right? Like this is like an important story. So like what was it that really chimed with you with that and made you want to lead the issue with it?
Yeah, I think we probably both have different perspective. At least for me personally, it was something that I didn't necessarily see a connection to electronic music or nightlife to start. And I think if you were to tell Vietnamese people the same, like why would a Lotto story belong in a magazine about queer nightlife? I think when you start reading it, then you start to see these connections that are maybe unexpected of how this history that's been going on way longer than a lot of these young collectives have been around, how the influence of that has actually trickled through the whole country into these spaces and collectives. So I feel like our magazine is focused on contemporary queer nightlife, but we want to always try to understand the context that it sits within and the history that it comes from. So that was a really fascinating history to learn about.
Yeah. And I think for me, the first reason why we wanted to start with it was because it's one of the earlier history of Vietnamese queer activities. It's also interesting because it is a decolonized art form, because so much of Vietnamese culture today, like things that people would think about it is like, the pho, the banh mi, so much of it is also decolonizing, right? Like we decolonizing broth, whatever the French name was from the French, but also the banh mi, like from the baguette, to the point of decolonizing the bingo game to be something that's ours. And it was so unique and amazing that this form of decolonization was done by trans people. And it is one of the first acts, it's also one of the first source of income, allowing these people to make a living. Also, it's just so fascinating because it also reminds us so much of the development of, ballroom culture in Harlem, because also organized in troops. It's also having a mother leading other people. So there's just a lot. What we love about this story is the duality, the parallel, but also the place where it doesn't develop in the same trajectory as other developments around the world.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Yeah. And it's just so joyful. It is a very, very joyful art.
Yeah. And it does that thing of showing like, this is not a story about queer culture. It's not a story about Vietnamese culture. It's specifically what happens when these two cultures kind of interact with each other and the, kind of almost how sort of like traditions sort of like grow up within a culture being affected by one another. And then Viet, you also picked out that amazing photo of the dancer with the motorcycle on her head, which like I'm just going to show it again now because it's so good. Like when did you first see this picture, and did that at that point you were like, well, we're definitely going to put that in the magazine?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we know about we know about this collective for a long time, but then when we saw this picture, actually saw this performance on Instagram, it was like, oh my God, that's gonna be a showstopper. We need to have it. It's gonna be insane, and we need to also have her at our launch event because it's such an amazing embodiment of the spirit there. It's so wild, it's so bold, it's so fun. And also the fact that she was just like carrying a motorbike, which is also like as good of a symbol of Vietnamese culture as any. So I'm just like, I don't know what level of conceptual and layers, like I need to explain here. Like, this is just too good. And
Yeah.
also the fact that she's a trans woman, the power and the strength that comes with it. Like our logo is a heel, which is a celebration of femininity power. She's that. She's so no one.
Totally. And I think there's like maybe it's in the picture caption, it says something about she's from I think like the Mekong Delta,
Yes.
and that's like a traditionally kind of like a maybe like a lower status kind of area. So I guess there's like a class component that comes into it as well.
Yes, there's a class component to it, but there's also another interesting level to it is that like sometimes they also perform this as funeral, and sometimes they also perform it as wedding. So it's a sort of a spectacle, which also point to the place of queer people back in the day, which is a spectacle. But in a
Mm.
spectacle, but that is also a symbol of power these days. So I think there's again that duality of something that was once seen as a spectacle can now become a source of strength for modern and younger queer kids. It's just lovely for us because now we see it in the club night.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so another thing that I really loved about this magazine was just like the attention to detail, the level of detail. I mean, I generally like footnotes in a magazine anyway, because that's like, I'm like, num num num, give me more of this information that you've pulled up here. But like there's the one where you have okay, so like the club night Vap Cook Da, I think,
Yes.
like VCD.
Yeah.
So that translates to tripping over a rock. Well,
Yes.
I'm not going to explain. You'll do a better job than me. You explain the sort of like the sequence of meanings to this.
You go
I
first.
think
I
we
have to
can
like look at it
explain
just to
it.
make sure that I don't forget it because it was
Well, it means tripping over a rock,
yes.
literally in Vietnamese. So it's sort of like
Yeah.
a joke where it came from. And it's something that a lot of people think is like quite funny, I think, there generally. Um,
Yeah, let me see. Because I mean, I know that I have even more interpretation of it, but I think so. Two layers of it. The first time that I hear Vokubda, it's not even in the magazine, so this is editor T. But basically, if you go to a Vokubda party, and then you would also sometimes see this kind of rituals where people would do this kind of thing where they pretend like they trip over a rock, and they would do like ah. And the joke is basically that in Vietnam, if you walk on the street, you will see people who acting very straight because this could be queer gay men trying to pretend like they're very straight and they're very masculine. But then if they happen to trip over a rock, then their true self will reveal. So that's become a ritual. People are like, this is how you reveal your true self. So this is a party where you can reveal your true self. You can just come here and act like you constantly tripping on a rock because then you can just be feminine. You can just be that. For me, that was like the best joke ever. But then obviously the vocal die is also kind of like a homage to the ballroom culture where people, you know, doing the dip at the end of a sentence. So that was also because this whole party is basically inspired by ballroom culture as well. So, and then obviously the third layer is the idea of how this party was just done sort of like as a fluke. People just wanted to do something, and then the founder just kind of stumbled one success next to another success, you know, one shortcoming, but then the next one will become another international success. So it just, there's a lot of serendipity that was part of the success of this collective. So it was just fun.
Lots of stumbling.
Lots of stumbling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, just the again, it's ambition. Like the idea of like trying to kind of explain that like dense kind of like series of meanings in a magazine. I just like it. I properly was absorbed by it. Like you know, it kind of like took me in like through the different like layers of storytelling, and then I think balancing that sort of like fastidious approach. There's also, as I was saying earlier, like the real kind of joyfulness, but then also with like a real sort of like I guess kind of sort of like weight behind it. And so in this issue, so you start with your letter to your mum about you coming out, and you have that the phrase "bede."
Yeah.
So that's like a homophobic slur, right?
Yeah, a homo. So bede is basically Vietnamese for faggots, and it comes from pédophile in French, but and then it sounds exactly what it is. It comes from the word pedophile. So it was as sort of a way to conflate homosexuality and queerness to, you know, a form of abuse. That's sort of, and that's become a slur. But as with many things in Vietnam and queer culture, we sort of like just take that as a word of empowerment now. So now if you go to party, people just very proudly call themselves bede, and trying to like regain that worth and that value and take that word back for ourselves.
And I think just to your point about trying to tackle topics that are joyful, but also more serious. When we started the magazine from the first issue, our whole idea was that in these nightlife spaces, when we went to a party, we would also, in these off moments, have conversation with strangers that really stayed with us. Because I think for a lot of people who might be outside of nightlife or queer nightlife, when you hear of going to a party or you see someone who goes out often, then you could maybe just think that it's just a form of letting go, letting loose, escaping something. And there's definitely components of that in there, but there's also so many other things that are part of a night. And with each issue, we want to take nightlife and talk about it in different ways. So there's a couple different topics that we try to dive into, like politics and policies, or music, art, and their intersection, or the ambiance of a night.
But also different emotions, right? Like there's a fun to it, but there's also a level of seriousness. There's joy, but there's also sadness, because those things coexist.
At the end of the day, these parties exist to give space to people who don't have a space in the everyday life outside of the night. So there is a very serious component to each issue, because that's the reality of where these parties happen.
You also, it feels like you're kind of balancing the magazine where, so Viet, you have your kind of letter to your mum coming out at the start of the magazine, and towards the back of the magazine, Jeremy, you have a piece where you're, I think, at a party in a cave.
Yes.
And so, well, okay. So again, I'm not going to tell a story. You happen to you tell a story.
Sure. Yeah. So as we said with this issue, we really wanted to elevate as many local voices and stories as we could. And so we were a bit skeptical of like, should my voice be actually part of this? But the more we thought about it, we thought it's a small poem that is in there. It's like a journal entry. And it felt appropriate in there because what happened was we were at this festival that happens every April. One of the two stages is in a cave, you're right. And while we were there, surrounded by so many friends from Vietnam and people who had also come and were visiting, there had just been this drag takeover where several of the drag collectives featured in the magazine, they all work together from the north to the south, and they perform in this rural area in a cave in Vietnam. It's such a crazy thing to see. So the energy was at such a high, and then very suddenly the energy completely went the other way because a friend of ours who we were with got an update from another friend who was again halfway around the world in Berlin, and her girlfriend were celebrating an anniversary. They were holding hands on the street in the middle of the daylight, broad daylight, and were violently attacked. And there were photos as well, and it was, to be honest, quite horrifying. And we were not in the space in any capacity to see or handle that. We were in a place of being with friends and wanting to celebrate and being in Vietnam. And suddenly we were slapped with a very harsh reality of life outside of that bubble that we were in.
Yeah.
And so this was sort of a journal entry that I wrote to try to process what had happened. So it's a very serious note on the other side of the spectrum of the joy, but we thought it was really important to include because nightlife is not all about joy. It's not all about partying. It's also about being there for each other and working through difficult moments in each other's lives.
Yeah. It feels like it's kind of, it's almost like, you know, that's the sort of like the driving force that keeps the magazine going, and then the sort of joyful stuff is the ways of like expressing that sort of the resistance and the, like, you know, the determination to not be cowed by that stuff. So when we spoke in September last year, you were saying at that point, well, you basically, you wouldn't tell me where you were going to be going for the next issue. The one thing that you were saying for sure is like it's not Europe, like you know, definitely not doing it in Europe. But it felt like there were some kind of parameters for like what would be a suitable place for no one. So like I'm not going to ask you to tell us where issue 3 is because I don't think you want to, but give us an idea of like what are the sort of places that are right for this magazine.
Yeah, cool. I think let me just think about this real quick because we have 3 criteria that I want to pull up. Can you help me pull it up quickly?
Yeah, I mean,
Just wanted to make sure that we're responded methodically because details matter. Next. Yeah, there we go. Next one. There we go. So basically because we also have to keep reminding ourselves about this as well. So essentially, when it comes to selecting CDs, there are 3 criteria. Number 1 is as simple as feasibility. Is it a place where we can access? Is it a place where we have somewhat of a network? Is it a place where we actually can visit? Because we're a 2-man, 2-people team, right? So we also need to rely on our network and our people to kind of be able to tell these stories, which is also why we're constantly seeking to expand our network and meeting up with people and making this possible. Because if we just keep sticking with our bubble, we can never take this magazine anywhere. So feasibility.
And then the next is all about diversity, and that's really has to do with trying to find places that are not so much written or documented about in English or otherwise. For example, Vietnam, I think it would be very difficult to find a lot of the stories or collectives or spaces if it weren't for a magazine like this sort of collecting them. But it also means a place like Amsterdam, because Amsterdam is a queer capital in many ways. It's the first country, it sits in the first country to legalize same-sex marriage. But again, if you were to look up queer nightlife in Amsterdam, you would see a very different picture than what's in our magazine.
Yeah, so I think it's feasibility, it's diversity, and then finally it's just dimensionality. So I think to the point of Amsterdam, one could argue that there's enough story about Amsterdam already. There's enough story about New York or Berlin already. So if we do end up going to these places, our job is to really think about how can we introduce a new dimension to these conversations, one that other people haven't seen before. So ultimately, we really exist to just trying to platform unspoken about, undiscussed, you know, not discussed enough about stories of queer nightlife. So that's sort of like the criteria.
And like, so you made a film with issue 2, and obviously you've had these parties and launches as well. I guess it strikes me that one of the benefits of making a thing in print is that you've then got this like kind of archival thing. Like you talked earlier about making something that takes up space.
Yeah,
It's like a record of something.
yeah.
Like, how do you feel like the media differ? Like so like why do you make a magazine and what's important about that? And then why do you make a film and like what's the point of that? How do they all sit alongside each other?
Yeah, for sure.
I can talk about the film. You want to talk about the mag?
Sure, yeah. I think for the magazine, the reason why we wanted to start with a print magazine, to our point earlier, was, yeah, take up physical space. The second thing is just the reality is when we had this idea, we just recognized the nature of today. So the digital medium is so fleeting. It's like when you just scroll through your social media, things pops up, you see it, and then it's gone. And in many ways, like nightlife archive has always been quite ephemeral. So like you have the flyers and then the flyers gone. So there's really no trace of our history. So then we wanted to create a physical magazine because it's also a kind of medium that facilitate a bit of a intentional consumption, or we hope so, because you need to flip the page to move on and to kind of continue reading the story. So we hope that in facilitating that design frictions, that sense of commitment to the story that you're reading, that we can create a space for the reader to truly internalize and understand the stories that were written.
Mm, mm.
And for the short documentary that we made, it was a bit of a surprise. We didn't start the second issue thinking we were going to make a short documentary, but if you talk about ambition, we did think that for the launch, when we were going to do one in Amsterdam, we would have loved to bring some of the people that we feature in the magazine to Amsterdam to perform in a space here and just to experience nightlife here, to really create this like cultural exchange of queer nightlife. A lovely idea, but obviously it requires a lot of time, effort, and money. To get a Vietnamese person a visa to come to Europe is quite tricky. It takes a lot of time, and that's another full-time job that we can't do. Plus, the more we thought about it, it's so difficult to try to choose, if you can, even one or two people from this whole magazine of an amazing community of people. So we thought the purpose of doing that, like I said, is a cultural exchange. So could we do something similar by actually capturing the many stories of the contributors that we had in the magazine, the main contributors, their perspectives, why they wrote what they did, how they experienced nightlife. It's as if we transported anyone who watches it, this is our hope, to a club night in Vietnam where they sit down to talk with one of these people, and suddenly they just learn so much about the scene there without actually having to travel there.
It's beautiful. I love it. It's so good. And I mean, you were talking before, I think it was before we started this conversation, you had said that you've started work on issue 3 already.
Yes.
So given that you've had this like, a big step forward from issue 1 to 2, I think in terms of the structure of the magazine and the actual material in the magazine, but then also with the launch events and with like the film as well, do you have plans for like how this is going to then develop on again with issue 3?
Yes, I mean, I can talk a little bit about how issue 2 is not even done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so issue 2, we haven't really announced this yet, but we have another project with issue 2 that's gonna come out in October. And in this club, I guess you were one of the first to know about this. But essentially, we're working on another physical artifact, which is a vinyl record that will feature 7 tracks produced by up-and-coming queer music producers from Vietnam and its diasporas. The idea was then we gave them a brief on a very specific topic and theme of Vietnamese expression, and then they each created a track The idea was also honestly accessibility, because we have actually feedback from people who really like the idea of the magazine, but they just literally said that I am dyslexic. So even though I really love this, but it's really hard for me to read, I'm more of a sound person. So we decided to create this record, and then all of the proceeds and revenue, actually revenue of this records, will also go back to 2 nonprofit organizations in Vietnam as well. So to answer your question, essentially right now we're running 2 production at the same time. So I'm trying to, obviously we share the task, but I'm leading this sort of vinyl process, and Jeremy is already beginning with issue 3.
Yeah, and issue 3 is in the works. It's in the beginning. I think to your point, we're also questioning how to not necessarily top the second issue, but just to stay consistent.
Yeah.
It's something ongoing, but it's quite an exciting period that we're just starting, and a good sign that we have the energy to continue with it, because it is, of course, a lot of work, the many different components of the magazine. So we just want to make sure we're continuing to be excited about working on it, and there's a lot to be excited for in the next issue.
Yeah, and I think what we do know is we're a magazine first and foremost. So if we have to prioritize and deprioritize anything, we're always gonna prioritize making the magazine. Launch events are nice to have, records are nice to have, film is also nice to have. Like if we can't do anything, we'll at least make the magazine.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about it. Really good luck with all the different bits that you've still got coming up. And I guess I'll look forward to seeing that 3rd issue at some point.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the time, and for everyone who joined in. Really appreciate chatting.
Yeah, and also for having no one as part of Stack Subscriptions. It's an honor.
Hey, I'm so pleased we did it. I'm so pleased. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming and watching. Thank you, Dominic, for your question. And I hope I'll see you again this next month.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.